The rain had been falling since morning, turning the small town streets into a blur of puddles and reflections. Inside the corner restaurant, the sound of raindrops tapping on the windows mixed with the faint clinking of dishes. The warm lights made the place feel cozy, but for the waitress working behind the counter, it was just another long day trying to make ends meet. Her name was Lena. She had been working here for nearly 2 years, ever since her mother's health got worse and her younger brother needed help with school. She was only in her mid-20s, but the tiredness in her eyes made her look older sometimes. Still, she always wore a smile, even when her back hurt and her hands ached from carrying trays all day. It wasn't just about keeping her job. She believed a smile could make a person's day a little better, and in a place like this, where people came to escape their worries for a short meal, kindness mattered. That evening, the restaurant was almost empty. The usual crowd didn't show up because of the heavy rain. Only a few customers sat by the window, sipping coffee or scrolling through their phones. Lena wiped down the tables, humming softly under her breath. Her manager, a grumpy man who cared more about money than people, sat behind the counter counting the day's earnings. "Make sure no one eats without paying," he said without looking up. "Last week you gave that old woman soup for free. We can't afford that again." Lena didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to cleaning. It wasn't the first time she'd been scolded for being too kind. But how could she turn people away when she knew what hunger felt like? There were nights she'd gone to bed after giving most of her dinner to her mother. The clock ticked past 9. The rain outside showed no sign of stopping. She was about to close when the door slowly opened. A man stepped in, shaking water off his worn coat. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe older. His hair was messy, his beard unshaved, and his shoes were covered in mud. His eyes, though, were calm, tired but kind. Lena noticed how he hesitated before walking in, as if unsure if he was welcome. The manager immediately frowned from behind the counter. "We're closing soon," he said sharply. The man nodded quietly. "I'm sorry, I just wondered if I could get something warm to eat, anything. I don't have much, but..." Before he could finish, the manager interrupted. "Then you can't afford to eat here. Try the shelter 2 blocks down." Lena felt her heart twist. The man's voice wasn't demanding. He sounded humble, almost ashamed to ask. He gave a small nod and turned to leave, but something inside her couldn't let that happen. "Wait," she called softly. He stopped and looked back, his face half hidden by the dim light. "It's still raining outside," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can sit down and warm up for a bit. I'll bring you something." The manager shot her a glare. "Lena," he hissed. "Don't you dare!" But she ignored him and led the man to a small corner table near the piano. It was the only spot in the restaurant where the light was soft and you could hear the rain more clearly. The man looked uneasy. "I don't want to cause trouble," he murmured. "You're not," she said with a smile. "Just sit. I'll be back in a minute." She went into the kitchen and poured a bowl of warm soup, adding a piece of bread on the side. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill a hungry stomach. She placed it in front of him and said gently, "Eat slowly. It's hot." He looked at the food for a moment, then at her. "You're kind," he said softly. "Not many would do this," Lena shrugged. "It's just soup," but the man smiled faintly. "No, it's more than that." While he ate, the rain continued to fall. The restaurant was almost empty now, just one customer left finishing her coffee near the door. Lena began stacking chairs and wiping tables, glancing over occasionally to make sure the man was comfortable. After finishing the soup, he sat quietly for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the piano in the corner. It was old but still beautiful. The restaurant's owner had bought it years ago for decoration more than for music. Sometimes customers played a tune or two, but no one had touched it in weeks. The man stared at it as though it reminded him of something far away. Then he looked at Lena and asked almost shyly, "Would it be all right if I played something? Just for a minute. I promise I won't break anything." Lena blinked in surprise. "You play?" He smiled faintly. "Used to. Long time ago." She glanced toward the manager, who was still counting cash, and then back at the man. "Go ahead," she said softly. "I'd love to hear it." He rose slowly, his movements careful, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. When he sat at the piano, he ran his fingers gently over the keys. They were a little dusty. He pressed one key, then another, testing the sound. Then, without warning, he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost uncertain, but soon they grew steady and smooth. The sound filled the small restaurant, gentle and deep, like a story being told without words. The melody seemed to capture everything. The rain outside, the loneliness of the night, and something else too. Something warm and full of life. Lena froze where she stood, the rag still in her hand. The few customers who were left stopped what they were doing. Even the manager lifted his head from his papers, frowning in confusion. The music changed, rising, falling, wrapping around the room like a memory. Every note felt alive. It wasn't the kind of music you'd hear from someone just playing for fun. It came from someone who had lived, who had felt both pain and beauty. The man's fingers moved with a grace that didn't match his worn-out clothes. His eyes were closed, his face calm, as if the piano was speaking for him. Lena felt a lump form in her throat. The song reminded her of her childhood, of nights when her father used to play old tunes before life got hard. It made her want to cry, though she didn't know why. When the last note faded, silence filled the air. No one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another joined. Soon the few people left were applauding softly, moved by something they couldn't explain. The man opened his eyes and gave a small, humble smile. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost embarrassed by the attention. He stood, walked back to his seat, and put on his coat. Lena hurried toward him. "That was beautiful," she said. "You play like someone who belongs on a stage." He chuckled softly. "I used to," he said. "A long time ago. Life had other plans." Before she could ask more, he placed a few coins on the table. "For the soup," he said. She looked down at the small amount. "It's all right," she whispered. "You don't have to." He shook his head gently. "No. Everyone should give something, even if it's small." He picked up his coat and walked toward the door. Just as he reached it, he turned and said, "You have a kind heart. Don't let anyone change that." Then he stepped into the rain and disappeared into the night. Lena stood by the piano for a long time, listening to the echo of his music in her mind. The sound of the rain seemed softer now, almost as if the world itself was listening too. The manager came over, shaking his head. "Strange man," he muttered. "Probably some failed musician." But Lena didn't answer. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to that man than met the eye. Something about the way he played, the depth in his music. It didn't sound like failure. It sounded like someone who had seen the world and carried its stories in his heart. As she cleaned up and turned off the lights, she found herself looking at the piano again. For years it had just been decoration, but tonight it had come alive. When she walked home through the rain, the melody still played in her mind. She didn't know who that man was or where he came from, but she knew she'd never forget that moment. Sometimes life brings strangers across your path for a reason, even if you don't understand it right away. That night, as she checked on her mother and tucked her brother into bed, she whispered a small prayer for the old man. She hoped he found warmth and shelter. Far away, under the same rain, the man walked alone through the quiet streets. His coat was soaked, but there was a faint smile on his face. It had been years since he'd played for anyone, not since he walked away from the world of fame and fortune that once surrounded him. But tonight, a waitress with a kind heart had given him something money could never buy: simple human warmth. And though she didn't know it, that act of kindness would soon come back to her in a way she could never imagine. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets damp and shining under the early sunlight. Lena walked to the restaurant with her usual slow steps, her thoughts still tangled with what had happened the night before. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear that music, the way it filled the restaurant, the way it made her heart feel light and heavy at the same time. It wasn't just that the stranger played beautifully. It was how he played, like every note carried a story. She couldn't explain it, but something about him didn't feel ordinary. When she entered the restaurant, her manager was already there, grumbling as he checked the inventory. "You're late," he said, though she was right on time. "Sorry," she replied quietly, tying her apron. He didn't notice the faraway look in her eyes. "Don't forget," he added sharply, "no more feeding strays. I don't care how kind they look." "We're not a charity." Lena nodded but said nothing. Inside, she felt a little sting. The man hadn't felt like a stray to her. He'd been gentle, polite, thankful. And that music, no one like him could be just a wanderer. The day went on as usual. The breakfast crowd came and went. The smell of coffee filled the air and the noise of chatter drowned out her thoughts. But every now and then she'd glance at the piano in the corner. It sat there quietly again, just like before, as if nothing magical had ever come from it. By the time evening came, the restaurant was busy again. A local group of workers had come in after their shift, laughing loudly, asking for their usual table. The rain clouds returned and the world outside grew dark again. In the middle of the noise and rush, Lena caught herself humming the tune the man had played. She didn't even realize it until a customer asked, "That's a beautiful song. What's it called?" She smiled softly. "I don't know. A man played it here last night." The woman raised her eyebrows. "Oh, a performer?" Lena shook her head. "No, just someone passing by." "Then he must have been someone special," the woman said. "You don't forget music like that." The night passed slowly. Around closing time, when most of the customers had gone, Lena sat at a corner table sipping tea. She glanced outside and saw a figure walking down the wet street. For a moment she thought it might be him, but it was just another stranger with an umbrella. She sighed. Maybe she'd never see him again. Maybe that was the kind of meeting that only happens once, like a small miracle meant for one moment. 2 days passed. The weather cleared, and the restaurant returned to its normal routine. But something strange began to happen. People started asking about the man who played the piano. At first, Lena thought it was just a coincidence. A young couple came in and said, "We heard there was a man who played a song here last week. Is that true?" Then another group of people asked the same question the next day. Apparently, one of the customers who had filmed a short clip of the stranger's piano performance had shared it online. The video had started to spread quietly among locals. People were amazed by the music and curious to know who the mysterious pianist was. The manager, who once complained, now smiled every time someone mentioned it. "Well, I guess our restaurant is famous now," he said proudly. "Maybe I'll even buy a new sign." Lena didn't care about fame. She just hoped the man was doing all right. She wondered where he was staying, if he had found a warm place to sleep, if he ever knew how much his music touched people. A week later, something unexpected happened. The restaurant received a call from a local charity group. They wanted to book the place for a small private dinner. It was for an event hosted by a well-known business organization that supported struggling artists and musicians. The manager agreed instantly. "Big names, good money," he told Lena with a grin. "You'll help serve that night. Don't mess up." On the evening of the event, the restaurant looked completely different. White tablecloths covered the tables. Candles flickered softly and the air smelled of flowers. Everyone was nervous. Cars began arriving outside, sleek, shiny ones that didn't belong in this quiet neighborhood. Well-dressed guests entered, shaking hands, laughing, and chatting about art, business, and success. Lena moved quietly between tables, carrying trays and making sure everything looked perfect. She didn't belong in their world, but she didn't mind. Her job was to serve, and she was good at it. Halfway through the night, as she poured wine for one of the guests, she froze. Across the room, standing near the door, was a face she recognized instantly. It was him. The same man who had come in that rainy night wearing a torn coat. Except now he looked completely different. His hair was trimmed, his beard neatly shaped, and he wore a fine suit that fit perfectly. The quiet sadness in his eyes was still there, but now there was something else too. Confidence, authority. He wasn't just a guest. People around him seemed to respect him deeply. Some shook his hand eagerly. Others nodded as he spoke. Lena almost dropped the wine bottle. Her heart raced. She tried to make sense of it. Could this really be the same man? The same person who had asked for a bowl of soup? The manager noticed her staring and whispered, "What's wrong with you?" Don't gawk at the guests, but she couldn't look away. The man turned slightly and their eyes met. For a second, time stood still. He smiled gently, the same kind smile from that night. Then someone called his name. "Mr. David, we've been waiting for you." Lena's breath caught. Mr. David, the name sounded familiar. Then it hit her. She'd heard it before on the news, in articles. A successful businessman known for supporting art foundations, who had disappeared from the public eye for years. He was that man. She quickly turned away, her hands trembling as she tried to focus on her work. Her mind was spinning. Why hadn't he said who he was? Why had he come that night looking like a poor man? As the dinner went on, Mr. David, still the same quiet gentleman she'd met, stood near the piano. Someone from the event asked him to play half-jokingly, not realizing how serious that suggestion was. He hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "It's been a while," he said softly. Lena's heart skipped as he walked toward the piano. She set down her tray and stepped back, unable to move. The room fell silent as his fingers touched the keys. And then, once again, music filled the space. It was the same melody, the same one he'd played that rainy night, but now it sounded even richer. The notes glided through the air like light, wrapping around everyone in the room. The guests who moments earlier had been talking about money and fame were now silent, watching in awe. Lena felt tears well up in her eyes. Around her, even the toughest-looking businessmen seemed moved. One woman quietly wiped her cheeks. When the music ended, the room erupted in applause. People stood clapping loudly, calling his name, but Mr. David didn't look proud or boastful. He just smiled gently, bowing his head slightly before stepping away from the piano. Lena stayed at the back, watching as people surrounded him, praising his talent. Her heart was full of mixed feelings, surprise, joy, and something like pride. The man who had asked for soup was actually someone the world respected, yet that night he had seemed more humble and human than anyone else in this room. When the event ended, the guests began to leave. Lena helped clean up quietly, trying to avoid being noticed. She didn't know if she should go up to him or pretend she didn't remember. What would she even say? But as she turned toward the kitchen, she heard his voice behind her. "Lena." She froze. Slowly, she turned around. He stood a few feet away, his expression warm. "It's good to see you again," he said, her voice trembled. He smiled. "Yes, I wasn't completely honest that night." "You look so different," she whispered. "I was," he said. "Sometimes I step away from everything, to see the world without the walls that money builds around it. That night you didn't see a rich man or a stranger. You just saw a person." Lena looked down, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to pay for the soup," she said softly. He chuckled. "You didn't have to give it either. But you did." The silence between them felt gentle, almost peaceful. Before he left, he said quietly, "You reminded me of something I had forgotten. That kindness still exists in small places." Then, just like before, he turned toward the door. But this time he left behind something on the table, a small envelope. Lena stared at it after he was gone, unsure whether to open it. Inside was a simple note. It said, "For someone who gave more than she had to a stranger. Thank you." There was no money, just the note, and a ticket to an upcoming charity concert featuring him as the performer. Lena smiled to herself. It wasn't about money. It never had been. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. That night, after everyone had left and the lights were off, she stood by the piano again. She touched the keys softly and whispered, "Thank you." The melody from that rainy night played again in her mind, filling the silence around her with warmth. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the world felt strangely brighter to Lena. The sound of rain had been replaced by the gentle hum of sunlight through the windows, and even the air seemed fresher. But her thoughts were far away, back at the restaurant, back at the moment she saw him again, Mr. David, the man who had once looked like a wanderer but turned out to be someone powerful and respected. She still couldn't believe it. The note he left was folded carefully in her apron pocket, and she'd already read it a dozen times. There was nothing fancy in it, no promises or grand words, just a simple thank you. Yet somehow those few words meant more than anything she'd ever received. When she walked into work that day, the restaurant was buzzing. Her manager looked excited for once, which was a rare sight. "Guess what?" he said, waving his phone. "We're in the news. That video of the old guy playing piano, it's everywhere now. Reporters are saying it was David Hensley himself." Lena blinked in surprise. "David Hensley?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah. You didn't know? He's one of the richest businessmen in the country. Owns music foundations, companies, even schools. Apparently he's been out of the public eye for a few years, and now everyone's talking about his return. And it happened right here in our restaurant." He laughed proudly, already imagining new customers pouring in. "We'll probably get more visitors now. I'm thinking of putting a sign out front. The place where David Hensley played. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? Lena didn't answer. She wasn't thinking about fame or crowds. She was thinking about the man behind the name, the quiet stranger who had asked for soup, who had spoken gently, who played like his soul was hidden inside the piano keys. During her shift, customers kept bringing it up. Some asked questions. Others watched the video on their phones. They all sounded amazed, but none of them seemed to notice the same thing she did. The sadness in his music, the depth in his eyes. That night, after her shift ended, Lena walked home slowly. Her small apartment felt unusually quiet. Her mother was asleep, her brother studying by the window. She sat at the table and opened the note again. The ticket to his concert was still inside. She wasn't sure if she should go. People like her didn't belong at big events filled with rich guests and flashing cameras, but something inside told her she had to. When the day of the concert came, she took out her best dress, an old one she rarely wore because she didn't go anywhere fancy. She tied her hair neatly, looked at herself in the mirror and smiled nervously. The concert hall was bigger than she imagined. It shimmered with lights and people in elegant clothes. She felt small among them, clutching her ticket tightly as she found her seat near the back. When the lights dimmed, silence filled the room. Then he walked onto the stage. Mr. David looked the same as before, calm, composed, and quietly powerful. The audience clapped, but he didn't bow in a grand way. He simply smiled, sat at the piano, and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, but soon they grew stronger. The sound filled the hall, rising like a wave and carrying everyone with it. People listened with their eyes closed, moved by something they couldn't explain. For Lena, it was more than music. It was a story, his story. She could feel his loneliness, his search for meaning, his quiet longing for connection. Every note carried pieces of what he had lived through. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. People stood, shouting his name, but his eyes searched quietly through the crowd, until they met hers. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he gave a small nod, like a silent acknowledgement of the night that had changed them both. After the concert, she waited near the exit, unsure if she should approach him. She almost turned to leave when she heard his voice behind her. "I was hoping you'd come." She turned, smiling shyly. "I almost didn't. I don't usually go to places like this," he chuckled. "Neither do I, to be honest." They both laughed softly. The noise of the crowd faded as they stepped aside, away from the flashing lights and reporters. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "That night I wasn't just hungry for food. I was hungry for something real. Most people I meet see the name, the money, the fame, but you just saw a person." Lena looked down. "Anyone would have helped." He shook his head gently. "No, not everyone does. I've met people who walk past suffering because it makes them uncomfortable. But kindness like yours, it's rare. That's why I disappeared for a while." She looked at him curiously. "Disappeared?" He nodded. "Yes, years ago I built companies, performed on stages, gave speeches about success. But somewhere along the way I lost something. I stopped hearing the music in my own life. People smiled at me for what I had, not for who I was. I needed to remember what it meant to be human again." Lena listened quietly. His words made sense now. The pain she heard in his music wasn't just sadness, it was truth. "So you left everything?" she asked softly. "I walked away," he said. "I sold some of my businesses and started traveling. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I just wanted to meet people without the mask of wealth. Some ignored me, some judged me, but that night you didn't. You offered me kindness without asking for anything in return." She felt her eyes sting. "It was just a bowl of soup." He smiled gently. "It wasn't, it was dignity. You gave me back my faith in people." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them continued moving, people laughing, music playing, cameras flashing, but they stood in their own quiet corner of peace. Finally, he said, "I have something for you." He handed her a small envelope. "I don't want money," she said quickly, stepping back a little. He shook his head. "It's not money. Just read it when you're home." She nodded reluctantly, and he smiled one last time before someone called him away. As he walked off, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. That night, she sat on her bed staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter. It said, "Lena, you once told me it was just soup, but to me, it was a reminder of everything good left in the world." I've started a small project, a new cafe and music space that will hire people who need second chances. I'd like you to manage it. You don't need experience, only the heart you already have. If you agree, call the number below. David. Lena's hands trembled as she read the letter again and again. Manage a cafe? Her? She had always dreamed of doing something more than just waiting tables. But she'd never imagined an opportunity like this. She stayed awake most of the night, thinking about it. It felt too big, too unreal. What if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough? But then she remembered the music that had filled the restaurant that rainy night. The way it made her believe that even ordinary moments could hold magic. The next morning, she called the number. A woman answered politely and told her that Mr. David had been expecting her call. They arranged to meet at the new place that weekend. When she arrived, she couldn't believe her eyes. The building stood quietly at the edge of the town. Warm lights inside, wooden tables, and in the corner, a beautiful piano that looked just like the one from the restaurant. Mr. David greeted her with a smile. "Welcome home," he said simply. She laughed nervously. "I don't know anything about managing a place like this." He nodded. "You know about kindness and people. That's enough to start." He showed her around the kitchen, the seating area, the small stage for musicians. Everything was designed to feel like comfort. "This cafe isn't about money," he said. "It's about giving people a space where they can feel seen and heard. Just like you made me feel that night." Lena couldn't stop smiling. The place felt alive, full of hope and possibilities. Over the next few weeks, she learned everything she could, from taking orders to handling supplies, from greeting customers to managing schedules. And every evening, she'd sit near the piano, remembering how it all began. Sometimes Mr. David would visit, quietly watching her work, occasionally sitting at the piano to play a soft tune. Customers loved it, but few knew who he really was. To them, he was just a kind man with gentle hands and music that touched the heart. One evening, when the cafe was full and laughter filled the air, Lena looked around and realized something. Her life had changed completely, not through luck or money, but through one simple act of kindness. It reminded her that every good thing starts small. One meal, one note of music, one moment of compassion, and though she never sought reward, life had found a way to return her kindness tenfold. As she stood by the window, watching the sunset through the glass, she whispered to herself, "You never know who you're helping when you choose to be kind." Far behind her, at the piano, Mr. David began to play again, the same melody from that rainy night, soft, timeless, and full of gratitude. The cafe had been open for a few weeks, and already it felt alive. Soft lights glowed over wooden tables. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, and a gentle hum of conversation moved like a quiet river throughout the space. Musicians from around the town came to play, sometimes timidly, sometimes boldly, but always leaving the room feeling warmer than when they entered. Lena had settled into her role more than she had imagined possible. Managing a cafe wasn't easy. There were deliveries to schedule, staff to supervise, and countless small details that needed attention. But somehow it all felt right. She moved with a quiet confidence now, greeting customers with a smile and helping the musicians feel at home. And sometimes, she'd glance at the piano in the corner and think of him. Mr. David didn't come every day, but when he did, he was almost invisible. He would slip through the cafe doors quietly, sit near the piano and play soft melodies that made the customers pause and listen. It was never about showing off. It was about sharing something real. Lena had learned that music was his way of speaking without words, and she had come to understand the weight behind each note. One afternoon, as Lena was wiping down a table near the window, she saw him walking through the door. Today he looked different again, less formal than at the concert, but still composed. His eyes, calm and warm, found hers almost immediately, and he gave a small nod. She smiled in return, feeling a flutter of excitement she hadn't expected. She had come to respect him deeply, but now there was something more. A curiosity about the man behind the music. The man who had walked into her life like a gentle storm and left a mark that would never fade. After the cafe quieted down for the day, Lena approached him. "You've been playing a lot more lately," she said softly. He looked up from his hands resting on the piano keys. "I enjoy it here," he said simply. "There's a sense of calm, of honesty. People don't care who I am. They just listen. She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. It's different from the restaurant, isn't it? He smiled faintly. Yes. That night, in your restaurant, I was reminded of something I had forgotten. Life isn't just about what people see on the surface. Money, fame, success. Sometimes it's about small things. A meal, a smile, a moment of kindness. That night, you reminded me of all that. Lena felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't anything special, she said quietly. I was just trying to help. He shook his head gently. It was special. To me, it was everything. For a while, they stood in silence, listening to the soft sounds of the cafe, a spoon tapping against a cup, quiet laughter, the distant hum of a car passing outside. Then he spoke again. There's something I want to tell you, he said carefully. She looked at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. What is it? He took a deep breath. When I disappeared from the public eye, it wasn't just because I wanted to step away from the world. It was because I had lost faith in people. I built businesses, helped communities, and performed in front of thousands. But somewhere along the way, I felt invisible. People saw the wealth, the name, the title, but they didn't see me, and I needed to remember what it meant to be human again. Lena listened closely. She felt the weight of his words, the honesty behind them. So, that night, she said slowly, you weren't really hungry for food? He smiled faintly. No. I was hungry for kindness, for someone to see me as I am, not as what I've done or what I have. Most people would have looked at me and assumed I was just another poor stranger. But you... He paused, searching for the right words. You saw me. She felt warmth spread through her chest. I just did what felt right, she said softly. It wasn't about who you were. I just couldn't leave someone hungry. That's exactly it, he said. You acted without expectation, without judgment. That's a rare gift. They talked for hours that afternoon, sharing pieces of their lives. Lena told him about her mother's illness, the struggles with rent, the responsibility she felt for her younger brother. She shared the little dreams she kept hidden, dreams of one day opening a small place of her own, a place where people could feel welcome, safe, and seen. He listened quietly, nodding, never interrupting, never judging, and when it was his turn, he spoke of his life before disappearing, the pressures, the achievements that felt hollow, the emptiness that money could never fill. He shared the moments of joy he had found in unexpected places, the simple human connections that reminded him there was more to life than success and recognition. I never told anyone about my life like this, he said finally, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust anyone to understand. You understood without even knowing me. Lena looked down, feeling a mix of humility and disbelief. I'm just me, she said softly. I don't know why my actions matter so much. He reached out, lightly touching her hand. Because you reminded me that goodness still exists, that faith in people isn't lost. That's why I wanted to bring you here to this cafe. It's a new beginning for both of us in a way. Over the next few weeks, Lena began to see how true his words were. The cafe became more than a place to serve food. It became a space where stories were shared, where people found comfort, and where musicians came not for fame or money, but to be heard. Mr. David rarely spoke about his wealth or his past publicly. To the regulars, he was just a quiet man who played the piano beautifully. But Lena knew the truth. She saw how deeply he cared about the people who came through the doors, how much thought he put into each decision, and how he quietly supported artists and staff alike. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena stayed late to close up. She washed the counters and stacked the chairs, her mind drifting to the night that had changed everything. She glanced at the piano and saw Mr. David sitting there, his fingers moving lightly over the keys. The music was soft, almost like a whisper, but it carried a sense of hope. She listened, feeling the same mix of awe and comfort she had felt the first time she heard him play. Finally, he spoke without looking up. Do you ever wonder why life gives us these moments? She shook her head. Sometimes, but I don't know if we ever get answers. He smiled. I think we do. It's about connection. Small moments, small acts, they create ripples. That night when you gave me soup, you started a ripple that brought us here. This cafe, the people, the music. It all began because of a simple choice. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. I never imagined something so small could matter so much. It matters more than you know, he said. And it will continue to matter in ways you can't even imagine yet. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Lena learned to trust herself, to make decisions for the cafe, to lead with kindness just as she had always believed in. Mr. David remained a constant presence, but never overbearing. He offered guidance when needed, but mostly, he let Lena grow on her own. Customers came from nearby towns, drawn by the warmth of the place and the soft piano melodies drifting through the air. Musicians found courage to perform, inspired by the sense of respect and care that filled the room. And Lena discovered a new confidence within herself, realizing that she could manage, lead, and create without fear. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Mr. David approached her as she closed the doors. "You've done more than I imagined," he said. "This place, it feels alive. People are happy here, and it's because of you." Lena shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. You built this, gave me the opportunity." He smiled softly. "I gave you the space. You gave it life. That's the difference." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the quiet of the empty cafe. The soft hum of the lights, the faint scent of coffee, and the piano in the corner created a calm that neither of them wanted to break. Finally, Lena spoke. "I never thought a single act of kindness could change so much." He nodded. "It can, and it did. For both of us." As she left that night walking home under the stars, Lena realized something profound. Life didn't need grand gestures to be meaningful. Sometimes a single choice, a simple act of giving, a small moment of understanding, could change the course of everything. And in the quiet of her apartment, as she thought about the journey she had taken from that rainy night to now, she whispered softly to herself, "Kindness isn't just about helping others. It's about believing in the goodness of life even when you can't see the outcome." Far away at the cafe, Mr. David played one final melody for the night. It wasn't for fame or money or recognition. It was for the connection, the trust, and the ripple that a single act of compassion had created. A ripple that would continue to grow, quietly, beautifully, and endlessly. Months had passed since the cafe first opened. Lena had grown into her role completely, no longer the nervous young waitress who doubted herself. She now managed staff, planned events, and guided musicians who came to perform. Every day felt like a new adventure, filled with small victories and quiet moments that made her heart full. The cafe had become a place known not just for its warm drinks and fresh food, but for its atmosphere. People came to escape for a while, to feel safe, to listen to music that moved them. Lena watched it all unfold with a sense of quiet pride. She had built this life from something small, from kindness that no one else had expected to matter. One rainy evening, much like the first night she met him, Lena closed the cafe doors and stepped outside. The street glistened under the rain, reflecting lights like tiny stars scattered across the pavement. She pulled her coat tight around her and started walking home, thinking about the day and the people who had come through her doors. As she turned a corner, she noticed someone walking toward her. Her heart skipped a beat. It was him, Mr. David. He looked different from before, though still the same gentle presence. Today he wore casual clothes, his coat damp from the rain, but his eyes held the same warmth and depth that had drawn her in months ago. "Lena," he said softly, smiling. "Hello," she replied, her voice light but steady. She felt a mix of excitement and calm, the strange feeling of familiarity that came with someone who had quietly changed her life. "I was hoping to catch you," he said. "Do you have a few minutes?" She nodded, curious. "Of course." They walked together to a small park nearby, the rain softening into mist. The world was quiet, almost still, as if it had paused to listen to their conversation. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, "for everything you've done. Not just for me, but for the cafe, for the people who come here, for the musicians. You've created something special." Lena shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. You gave me the opportunity," he smiled. "I gave you space, yes. But you brought it to life. That requires heart, courage, and belief. Something I saw in you from the first night you offered me soup." She felt a lump in her throat. That night seemed so long ago, yet its memory was vivid. The rain, the small table, the piano in the corner, and him quietly asking if he could play. She remembered the music, the way it filled the restaurant, the warmth it brought. "You really changed after that night, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I did. You reminded me that the world still has people who act without expectation, who give because it feels right." I had forgotten that. Lena smiled, though tears threatened to fall. I just did what I could. I didn't know it would matter so much. That's the point, he said gently. The smallest actions can create the largest ripples. For a while they walked in silence, listening to the gentle patter of rain and the distant hum of city life. It was peaceful, and Lena realized how much she had come to trust him, how safe she felt around him despite all the surprises he had brought into her life. Finally, he stopped and looked at her seriously. I want you to know something else, he said. That night I came in looking like a stranger, hungry for food, tired of the world. But I left with something I hadn't felt in years, and hope. Your kindness reminded me that people can be good, even when life feels dark. And now, seeing what you've done with the cafe, I see that hope spreading. You've inspired others without even trying. Lena felt a tear roll down her cheek. I didn't know I could make such a difference. You already have, he said softly, and you will continue to do so. That's why I wanted to tell you something important. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to her carefully. Open it when you're home, he said. She nodded, clutching it tightly as they walked back. The rain had almost stopped, leaving the streets glistening and quiet. She barely noticed the world around her, lost in the anticipation of what the envelope might contain. Once home, she sat on her small bed, hands trembling slightly, and opened it. Inside was a letter neatly written. Lena, you have shown me and the world that kindness matters more than wealth, more than fame, more than any measure we often think defines a person. I have established a foundation to support people with potential but without means. Musicians, artists, and dreamers like you. I want you to be the director of the program here. Not for money, not for prestige, but to guide others with the heart you already have. Your actions created this ripple. Now you can help it grow. Lena sat there stunned. She had never imagined that her simple act of giving soup could lead to something like this. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a combination of awe, gratitude, and disbelief. It was more than an opportunity. It was trust. It was faith in her abilities and heart. Over the next few weeks, she began working with the foundation, helping young musicians, artists, and dreamers find their place. She guided them, taught them, and encouraged them, remembering her own journey and the small kindness that had started it all. Mr. David often visited, though never to overshadow her. He played music when needed, offered advice quietly, and watched as Lena blossomed in her role. They shared stories, laughter, and the quiet understanding that came from two people who had experienced life deeply and honestly. One day, a young musician approached Lena, shy and nervous. She reminded Lena of herself years ago, unsure, anxious, but full of potential. Lena took her hand gently and said, "Believe in your heart and the rest will follow. You can do this." As the girl practiced, Lena noticed Mr. David standing in the corner watching. He nodded slightly, a small smile on his face. She realized he had done the same for her, guiding her gently, never forcing, never demanding, but always encouraging. Evenings at the cafe became filled with laughter, music, and quiet conversations. Musicians from far and wide came to share their talents, inspired by the safe space Lena had nurtured. Customers came not just for food or coffee, but to experience the warmth, the sense of belonging, the magic that seemed to linger in the air. And through it all, Lena remembered the rainy night that started everything. She thought about the stranger who had walked in, about the music that had filled her heart, and about the kindness that had begun a chain reaction she could never have imagined. One evening, after a busy day, Mr. David played the piano quietly, a soft melody that reminded Lena of the first song he had ever played in the restaurant. She watched him, feeling a deep gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly, almost to herself. For a moment he looked up, catching her words. "For what?" he asked, his voice gentle. "For believing in people, for reminding me that one small act can change everything, for giving me the chance to be part of something bigger." He smiled faintly, nodding. "No, Lena, thank you. You reminded me that life's beauty lies in small moments, in kindness and trust. Without you, I might never have remembered that." They stood together in the quiet of the cafe, listening to the soft hum of the lights, the faint scent of coffee, and the piano's gentle melody. In that moment, Lena realized the truth she had always felt deep inside, that kindness, even in its smallest form, had the power to change lives. She looked around at the musicians, the staff, the customers, and the life she had built, and she knew that it all began with one simple choice: to help a stranger in need. Life had come full circle. The act of giving, the ripple that started with a bowl of soup and a quiet smile, had returned in ways she could never have imagined, and she understood fully and completely that even the smallest kindness could echo far beyond what the eye could see. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and steady, but inside the cafe, warmth and light filled every corner. Lena sat quietly at a table, watching the piano, listening to the music, and feeling a peace that only comes when you know your heart has made a difference. And far away, in the corner, Mr. David played one last song for the night. It was soft, full of gratitude, and timeless. The music carried a message that hope, kindness, and compassion could change everything, for those who gave it and for those who received it. Lena smiled, feeling the truth in every note. She knew that the ripple would continue, small acts, kind gestures, moments of trust, and that it would always come back to the heart that chose to believe in people, even when the world seemed dark. And in that quiet, magical space, she realized that one night of rain, one bowl of soup, and one stranger had given her a life far richer than she could have ever imagined. The music lingered, soft and steady, and Lena whispered, almost to herself, "Kindness changes everything. I will never forget that." And in the gentle glow of the cafe lights, surrounded by music, laughter, and hope, life felt full, warm, and beautifully alive.